All right. Here we go. Confession time. I hate the book of Judges. Right? I said this in the morning service, and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, but I really like the book of Judges." But nobody else said that. Because if you've read the book of Judges, you know why I dislike it so much. Because the book of Judges is this brutal and violent book. Now, when I worked out the preaching schedule, people wanted us to go through the books of the Bible, so I'm working that out. I get to pick when I'm going to preach most of the time. So I'm like, the book of Judges. What I'm going to do is do a little sermon series called Bedtime Stories for Your Kids You'll Never Tell Them. Right? And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to talk, and I'm going to go for the worst one. I'm going to go for the one at the end of the book where the person gets chopped up into little pieces and sent out, and an entire tribe gets wiped out almost, and we got to kidnap women for wives. This is the bedtime story I'm going to do. The Levite with the chainsaw. That's what I'm going to do. But as I read it, now I will confess as your pastor, I haven't read Judges from chapter 1 to chapter 21 in a long time, because when I read Judges, I pick out the stories that I enjoy out of Judges, and then I don't read the ones that I don't enjoy. But I had to read the whole book in one sitting because I wanted the whole book to kind of impact me if I'm going to speak on it. And it was rather sickening, okay? And I would suggest that if you were a person who's experienced any kind of trauma in your life, that you read Judges with care. And that you, from a children's, I don't even know, I didn't try the children's Bible version of it. The message... Oh, maybe the Action Bible might have because it's a difficult book. And we're going to talk about why Judges is in the Bible and why it would be important for us to at least know about it, if not read it, and reflect on it. But before we do that, as usual, when I speak on the Old Testament, I want to start somewhere that has nothing to do with the Old Testament. I want to talk about Time magazine. Now, I didn't ask this in the first service, but has anybody actually read this Time magazine? That would be interesting to see. Yes, so you've read this particular issue. Now, if you were to read this issue, is true, or the front cover, you might think, they're going to talk about, Socrates and epistemology, and they're going to talk about philosophers, and they're going to try to really wrestle with deep questions of reality. No. It's Time magazine, and they're talking about Donald Trump and about his ways that he uses the news. And here's the thing, they're struggling because what's been kind of exposed with our president is that politicians aren't honest. But he's just kind of a little bit more, upfront about it. Now, I made this joke, and I'm going to try to make this joke with you guys, but I don't know if you guys have seen the documentary House of Cards. Okay? But it's pretty clear that politicians are really messed up, right? You guys got it. So there are a couple House of Cards watchers in this group. The morning people are like, "You even know about that, Pastor?" Oh, shoot. No. I just want to, before we get into this, I don't make political statements up here, and yes, this Time magazine is about Donald Trump, but I want you to understand something. Politicians lie, and they've been lying for a very long time. And I saw a beautiful interview with George Bush Jr., who said, "Yeah, we do, and we need the press to catch us." Like he even said, "I hated them while I was in office, but they were good for me." Right? So even the politicians know that they're dishonest and they don't want any help. But maybe George, now that he's out, was trying to be a little bit more forthcoming. But yeah, so I just want to make that, yes, politicians lie. Okay, we'll put that on the back burner. This question, is truth dead, is an important question of our time, because I think in the cultural tensions that we all feel and the undercurrent that we're feeling is that we don't have any firm ground to stand on anymore. We don't know if what people are telling us is true. In fact, that's why we've kind of developed the whole, fake news kind of thing and all that kind of stuff is because we're really concerned about how is it that we can know what is real, right? This is a big question because if you don't know what's real, you can't make good decisions in life. If reality is fuzzy in all areas of your life, you cannot make good decisions. If you don't know what is true, you can't make good decisions. Now, culture, in some parts of our culture, has tried to deal with this by saying things like, well, science is truth, right? But science is the pursuit of truth, right? But we used to believe in the late 70s and early 80s that you would travel through space and, between planets there was nothing, right? No, now we know you go through dark matter. We've discovered new things. So science is great. And science is looking for the truth. And it is pursuing the truth. But science is not the truth. Now, Time Magazine's doing something really interesting here. Even though they want to talk about Donald Trump in it, they're kind of alluding to a previous cover. In 1966, or 1966. This is the question that they put up on their thing. Is God dead? So now, is truth dead? Is God dead? Time is trying to make an illusion here. And I don't know if they are completely doing it on purpose to the degree that I hope they are, but I think what they're trying to say is that in a culture where there was a being outside of us who could tell us what reality was, then it would be easier for us to understand what was true. But when we kill God, right, we kill the reality that tells us what is real, then it's very hard for us to know what is true, right? It's really hard for us to know what's true. But here, I think they're also saying, maybe they're not saying this, but I'm going to kind of extrapolate a little bit, is that they're saying that truth itself has a relational component to it, right? That it's not just left in a vacuum. That relational truth and relational reality has a deeper meaning than just objective statements of truth. So for instance, like if I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, versus when I kissed my wife for the first time, actually in all truth, the second time. When I kissed her the second time so many years ago, and she'll tell you that, we'll just pretend like the first kiss never happened. The second kiss, I knew something deep inside of me. I knew that I loved her. It was a truth, right? It was a deeper truth than 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? It was a reality that was bigger, but it was still true, right? It was a relational truth. The truth devoid of relationship becomes becomes something on a ship being tossed to and fro, to be manipulated and undermined. Okay? This shows up in our culture in a really cool movie. Spider-Man: Far From Home. Now, unfortunately, because this is such a recent movie, I cannot ruin it for you. So I won't, no spoilers, I promise. Okay? All right? It's all good. But so I don't know, I didn't know, but apparently, and I learned this after the first morning service, that Mysterio, which is the bad guy in this, is a comic book, like a legend. People know all about him. I didn't know that. But anyway, see, and I just might have messed that up for you. But anyway, if you hadn't figured that out. In this movie, there's this conversation going on about truth and lies and what reality is, right? In this conversation. From the very beginning of the movie to the very end, the end credits, the question that is being asked is, what is real? Now, some of the conclusions is that when you lie, things get complicated. When you keep secrets, things get complicated, and they catch up with you. And that honesty is the only way to fight back against those lies. But also, there's a little bit of a suggestion that love can also get us grounded in what's true, and maybe even able to defeat evil. Of course, because it's Spider-Man, you got to have punching to defeat evil. and webs and all that kind of stuff. But there is this thing. But here's the thing about the movie that I'd invite you to, if you have already seen it, go watch it again. If you haven't seen it, think about this. I think it's a bunch of millennials, okay, so that's 30-somethings, having this conversation with their little brothers, Generation Z, brothers and sisters, about what is true. Because George Orwell is quoted in this movie, like in about objective truth and what's real and what happens when objective truth is eroded. But I think the conversation is, can we believe anything? And how do we actually know what's true? And what kind of decisions can we make if we don't know what is real? So that conversation is going on in our culture. Time magazine, that particular issue, the If Truth is Dead, was put out like 100 days after Donald Trump became president. So it is the conversation in our culture. Now, we go to Judges, this book, and in chapter 17, verse 6, and this is really the beginning of the worst part, and then the end part also says this, and it says, in those days, Israel, and we'll get to who they are in a moment, had no king. Everyone did as what they saw fit. Some translations say they did whatever was right in their own eyes, right? This is Judges 17:6. So they did what they wanted. Now, there's a relatively famous preacher named Andy Stanley. He's the son of Charles Stanley, I think, or whatever. But a couple of years ago, I saw him preach, or listened to him preach on Judges, and I didn't actually listen or really go look up how he said this. I just put it out from memory. But Andy kind of summarizes or expands this idea for us to better understand it. They did everything, or they did whatever they saw fit. And he says, everyone did what they wanted to, when they wanted to, with whomever they wanted to. Right? And then to kind of put it forward into culture for us to understand, he put, as long as it didn't hurt anyone. Right? Because that is the motto that we all live by, which is we should be able to do whatever we want, whenever we want, with whomever we want, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. And yet, we wonder why we're having such a hard time with truth and lies. So I want you to hold on to that for a second. And as we're going to go to, I promise we'll get to Judges. But what I realized in preaching this the first time on Sunday morning was all I want you to do in this sermon is find things to take your, pickaxe and stick it into the mountain and hold on to that part. You might not get the other parts. I would invite you to grab onto parts of this sermon and begin to mull them over. Side note, I don't know if you knew this, but Seepin, which is my last name, is also an ice pick, like one of those, when you go mountain climbing and you have those picks to stick into the ice and climb with. That's a Seepin. I don't know. That's a pretty cool thing. I don't know, I told you that. Nobody really knows that, so they need to know that. As we talk about what is true, and as we wrestle with what is true, and when we kind of summarize Judges and kind of wrestle with the stark darkness of it, I want to offer you some truth, and I want to kind of link this to the previous statement. So John 16:12, New Testament, Jesus is about to head off to be crucified. He's preparing his disciples for this heavy conversation. And it says this in verse 12, I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. But when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. If you don't hear anything that's said from the rest of tonight, what I want you to hear is that if you are a follower of Jesus, you have the Spirit of truth. And he does not guide you into truth on Monday, but not Wednesday. And sometimes when he's sleeping, he forgets. No, he guides you into all truth. And that means that there is no truth that he cannot guide you into, which also means that as you wrestle with truth, you have the Spirit of God who can offer you and speak to you and direct you in what is true. And if we could think of truth as reality, he will guide you into all that is real and all that is good. Right? Paul kind of expands this, and he says in 2 Corinthians 3:17, now the Lord is the Spirit, so he's saying God, the Holy Spirit, God, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Some translations say liberty. But what I want you to see here is that it's not only that God, there's a Spirit of truth that guides you into all truth, but that truth delivers freedom. So here's a clue about understanding what reality is. If a freedom is not present in things, and when we talk about a freedom, it's a freedom from fear, a freedom from anxiety, a freedom from worry, a freedom from the darkness of death. Like if that's not present, then you are not headed towards truth. Okay? If that's not present, you're not headed toward truth. Now, I say all that because I suspect when you heard everyone did what they wanted to, when they wanted to, with whoever they wanted to, as long as it didn't hurt anybody, that in your mind you said, well, that's not good. And in your heart, if you were honest for a moment, you thought, well, it could be possible. Right? It could be possible because, in particular, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, is a belief that you and I have. That I should be able to do what I want, when I want, with whom I want, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. I want you to hold on to that because it's what is basically said in Judges 17:6. In those days there was no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Now, let's get to our story. We've been following the Israelites for the most part. The Israelites are God's people. Their hero so far, there are lots of heroes, but the hero that's most important in the first 5 books of the Bible, I think. I mean, Abraham's a big guy and there are others, but Moses is a pretty cool dude. I mean, there are other guys, but Moses, no one comes like, Moses and Jesus. Like Moses fills some big shoes. And he leads the people of God out of Egypt, through the desert, and up to the land that they're promised, the land of Canaan across the Jordan. Yeah. If you want to know how that's laid out, Google it. It'd be the best way to kind of get a visual of that. Moses passes away and hands the mantle to Joshua. Joshua leads the people into Israel, or into the promised land. He divides it out. He conquers it. And he leads a pretty honorable life. But they do not push everybody out. And Joshua dies. And that's where the book of Judges starts. The book of Joshua starts with Moses dying. The book of Judges starts with Joshua dying. So what I want to do, because we're not going to read a lot of these horrific stories, is I want to give you a summary of the book, and then we'll dive into chapter 2 of Judges. So, there are 21 chapters, and don't quote me on this, but I think there are 618 verses in the book of Judges. I mean, I'm really close, but I just can't remember. Chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 1, if you haven't read it, chapter 1 is just a summary of all of the people that Israel didn't kick out in the promised land, that they didn't finish conquering. Chapter 2 is, hey guys, you may not want to read the rest of this book, so let me summarize it for you. It really is. You may not want the details of this, so let me tell you how it all plays out. And so the way it plays out, it lays it out for us, and we'll look at it more in depth. But first, the Israelites look at the idols and the cool things that the people have that are not part of God's people, and they say, let's participate in that. Doesn't go very well for them, and those people end up oppressing them. Oppression isn't all that great, so the people cry out to God. You can see the pattern in your life already, right? You enter into sin, you experience some oppression, you're like, oh my gosh, Lord. And God raises up a judge. Now, it's not like a judge with a cute little wig and robes and a gavel. These are military leaders with authority to make decisions. God raises them up. He puts his spirit on them. Now, I want to stop there and say, just because God puts his spirit on somebody is not an endorsement of everything that they do. Right? That is an important reading of the Old Testament and the New Testament. Just because the Spirit of God is on a person, God is not like, good job, buddy. Right? The deliverance happens, and there's a little bit of peace, And as the peace comes, usually the judge dies, and then the people are like, look at the idol, and back to the thing. In fact, in Judges, it says, again. Right? And I don't know if you've probably experienced this in your life. You face something that's hard, you repent, you're delivered from it, and then you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror and you have a again moment, right? And you're back into that loop, right? Because the sin that we wrestle with in life is like an onion, right? You can take off the first layer, and that's a big layer, but then there's another layer, and there's another layer. And so there's this kind of process of peeling when we go through being sanctified. Now, you get to chapters 3 to 16, and you really could label them the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so we're going to talk about the good really quickly, and Mark is going to pronounce the first name for me. Othniel. He's a really good guy. You can go read about him. Then we have Ehud, and Ehud is the left-handed guy who, left-handed people, stabs a guy that's so rotund that he loses his hand in him and his sword. So he sneaks out, shuts the door, and his servants don't go in for a while because they knock and they don't hear anything, and they think, maybe he's relieving himself, but it gets pretty smelly, and eventually they go in after him. Now, the person that we should stop and talk about is Deborah, because Deborah is the only female judge that we have recorded in the Bible. In fact, we're going to sing a song after my message about Deborah that Lane wrote. But Deborah is this judge, and the general shows up to the judge, Deborah, and says, hey, let's go kill these guys. We need to take care of them. The people are oppressed, blah, blah, blah. And she says, okay, go do it. And he's like, all right, I'll go do it if you'll go with me. And she says, fine. But if I go with you, then a woman is going to be the one who gets the honor and not a man. All right, so she's like, it's going to be kind of shameful for you, which in that culture it is. So she's victorious, and these are 3 good judges. Now, there's a moment in Deborah where somebody gets a tent spike through their head, right? So you have to take a moment to imagine the tent spike and the hammer through the head while the guy's sleeping. But other than that, these guys, pretty good. Right? They're not doing anything crazy. Now, because you're like, what do you mean they're not doing anything crazy? Okay, well, let's talk about the bad. Let's talk about Gideon. Everybody who's ever read Judges likes Gideon because we all think we're Gideon. Because Gideon's, out there in a cave threshing some wheat, and God shows up to him and says, hail, mighty warrior. And he looks, where? Oh, what about, I'm like the least of all my brothers and the most nobody clan. And he says, the angel of the Lord says, go in the strength that you have and deliver God, my people. Eventually, after Gideon has tested him to make sure it's really God and not his, whatever substance he might have been doing, he needed to make sure that was God. And he does. God's like, fine, you want to make sure it was me? Then here's the thing. Get rid of your whole army except 300 guys. Here's some pots. Here's some torches. Here's some sticks. We're going to go beat the Midians. Tens of thousands of Midians. They're like the ants. And they do. They beat them. Gideon, everybody's like, this is what Gideon, we need to trust God, and if we only have a little bit, we can go, offer that to God and he'll deliver us. Only problem with Gideon is he defeats the Midianites, and then he's like, I think I'm going to make this idol. It's going to be partly Jewish and partly pagan, and then we'll all worship it. And on top of that, I need to kill a bunch of my brethren because they didn't help me, right? Okay. He delivers God's people, not the greatest guy. Jephthah, or however you say his name, is just a thug. A thug who happens to be like, God, if you deliver me, I'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my door. Who says that? I would say the first thing that comes out of the doghouse, I'll sacrifice. Who says the first thing that comes out of my door? What was he expecting? His daughter. And so, for some reason, in his mind, he thinks, this is what God wants, for me to sacrifice my daughter because I made a stupid oath to him. What you begin to see from the good judges is this downward spiral that gets worse and worse, and they lose an understanding of who God is. Until we get to the Hercules of the Bible, Samson, right? He's super strong. He has long hair. He's the lover. He loves the women. He loves being angry, and he loves killing people. Like, that's his thing. And really, I mean, he never ever, it seems to me, in all the times that I have kind of read through Samson, there's no real indication that he actually understands who God is at all. Other than God gives him this strength and he uses it to his advantage, and he's pretty proud and arrogant about it, right? And so this is the good, the bad, and ugly of the judges. There are actually a few other judges that, aren't that important per se. You can read those. But once we get to chapter 17, it's seriously, seriously messed up, right? To the point where I'm not actually going to talk about the last two stories. Because I just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to imagine it. I don't want to put those pictures in your head. And if you have a sturdy mind, you might want to read those and kind of be like, what the heck is Eric talking about? But what I'll say is that it turns into, as a few people said after morning service, like, Game of Thrones on steroids. That's kind of where Judges ends up. Okay, it's intense. It's so I ask the question, why is this book here? Because Jesus is absent from the book. Like, when I read the Old Testament, there are so many places where I can be like, oh, look, it's pointing to Jesus. It's pointing to to the gospel, to the coming Savior. This book, it's like, this is bad. This is bad. Right? How did we get here? Why is this book here? What's going on? Well, before we answer the question why, I want to kind of just talk about maybe the character of the Israelites that might give us some clues into our own selves. And because the book of Judges really is a picture of what happens when you have no knowledge of who God is. Okay, and we're going to kind of lay that out. All right, I'm going to need some help. All right, well, when it gets there, we're going to go to Judges chapter 2. And I want to read to you Judges chapter 2, verses 16 to verse 19, okay? It says, "Then the Lord raised up judges," so this is when the people are crying out, "who saved them out of the hands of these raiders." So these were raiders that they would go fight and get defeated by. "Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors, who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to the ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving them and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways." I want you to just catch a few things. First off, they would not listen to their judges. Right? So part of the reason they're in the place that they are is that they would not listen. Part of the reason that you are in the place you are is that you won't listen. They prostituted themselves to other gods. Do you understand? The kinds of gods that they're involving themselves with are not, just little minor statues. These are, Ashtoreth gods. These are sex gods. These are human sacrifice gods. These are ones that demand heavy prices on you. And so they're giving themselves to people and to gods that will oppress them. And then, as soon as they were delivered, they would quickly turn back. So these are things that I would ask you, okay, as you wrestle with things in your life, as you're wondering, why is my life kind of spiraling in this way? I would ask you, are you listening to God's voice in people's lives? People around you who are speaking? What are you connected to that's destructive in your life? that's eating you alive. And how quickly are you moving away from the good things that God has given you? That's a good thing. But here's the one that I just couldn't, it says they refuse to give up their evil practices and their stubborn ways. For me, that was very eye-opening in the sense that I am stubborn, right? If you tell me I can't do something, then I'll figure out how to do it. If you tell me it's easy to do, then I won't ever do it, right? Because I'm a stubborn person. If you tell me I'm doing something wrong, or you confront me a lot, being in this community, I've had to learn to be humble because I get confronted a lot. But I still have this resistance in me, like, no, because I must give up these things that you want me to know. I want to give up power. So this is kind of what's going on, at least, with the Israelites in the book of Judges, is that there's just this, they've got their fingers in their ears, and they're looking for the immediate pleasure, and they really don't care about what's going on with God, and they're stubborn, and that's why they're headed into this spiral. But you heard Deuteronomy read, and Deuteronomy kind of gives us a picture on how we might lift ourselves out of this and how the Israelites should have moved. Okay? And so I wanted to just read Deuteronomy chapter 6 to you, verses 1 through 12 again. And I'm going to stop and kind of comment on a few things because I think it's important. So, verse 1, chapter 6 of Deuteronomy. Now, if you remember when we went through Deuteronomy, this is Moses telling the people again what they need to do as they're up against the Jordan River and going to head into the promised land. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord, and here it is, your God, as long as you keeping all my decrees, all his decrees and commands that I will give you. And here's what I wanted you to pay attention to. I got messed up on the line here, and so that you may enjoy long life. That there is this holding on to these decrees that is equal to long life. Because if you live a life so caught up in lies, your life will be shortened. If you live a life in truth, your life will be lengthened. Now, I'm not saying that means that you aren't going to, have an early death or something. That there's a quality and a length of life that's given to you out of engaging in God's commands and fearing God. And then he goes on. He says, "Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you." So a good life, a long life, is connected to God's engagement, our engagement with God, our willingness to obey, right? And then he goes on. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord, the God is one." Our God is one. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts." Okay? So he's asking that these things be not in your mind, but in your heart. So when we're talking about that as an Israelite, what he's saying is that these commands be in the very bowels, the very emotions of who you are, that you feel them, right? That you embrace them. And impress them on your children. Like, impress them. Not suggest them to your children, not say, hey, maybe you should know about this, but impress them onto your children, right? Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of the houses and on your gates. Right? So there's this, something we talked about last week. Remember last week we said the process of really engaging God is a life of remembrance, right? Because we can't know we can't trust and imagine what God might be calling us into and the life that God might be inviting us into if we are not remembering what God has done in our life, right? This recitation of God's story in our life. He's saying you need to do this all the time, nonstop. Like the people need to say things like, oh yeah, like I kind of get tired of hanging out with him because all he talks about is Jesus. That's good. That's where we want to be. Not in a preachy sense, but and that's the very nature of who you are. Is someone who talks about what God has done in their life and what he's doing, and that your children can say those things. And then he goes on, he says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a land with large, flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful, it's important, that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. Here's why you would be invited to continually narrate your story from God's perspective, to continually talk about where God is. Because here's what happens when you don't, okay? The beginning of this week, I was frantically hunting for my shirt. It's the shirt that I love. It's the shirt that I wear a lot of times and people say, oh, that's a great color on you. And so I like the shirt. It's an important shirt to me, and I cannot find the shirt anywhere. It's my shirt. It's important to me. It gives me a certain level of identity. I know, like you think I'm over-exaggerating. No, it's my shirt. Can't find it anywhere. The Brunsons stole it. For those of you who don't know, I live in a community home with another couple, and somehow my favorite shirt, which I do not know how it did this, got into their dirty clothes and into the washing machine, and then it went through the dryer. Now, if you know anything about it, you can see I'm tall, big guy. You don't put tall, big guys' clothes in dryers. No, don't do that, right? Because they shrink. Luckily, this one is made of magic material, and God was gracious, and it didn't shrink. But here's the thing that was going on. I was mad. Why was I mad? Because it was my shirt. No, it was God's shirt, right? Recently, some things happened with my Volvo. Now, those of you who know me know that I own this Volvo that just kind of gradually looks worse and worse and worse. But what you don't know is that I replaced the head gasket, that I've replaced the complete cooling system in this vehicle. The transmission has been replaced. I love the engine of this car. I just don't like the body. Because if you know anything about a Volvo, is it just doesn't really matter. It just deteriorates on its own because it doesn't like being outside of Europe. So it's upset about these things, right? It's very European, and it can't handle the heat. But I love my Volvo, and things keep happening to my Volvo. And you may laugh about this, but no, it's mine, right? It's not God's. And so what happens is that I get so stirred up about this, and it impacts the way I react and engage with people. What God is through Moses is saying to the people is like, do not forget that the home that you sit in, the wife and husband you have, the relatives you have, the people that you love, the job that you have, all those things that you have. And if you're an American, I don't care where you're at. You have. Yes, some of us have less than others, and that's something we have to deal with. But you have, and it's not yours, but you think it is. And you have gotten to the place where you have forgotten. This is where it begins. We forget, right? We forget. Because we haven't been telling God's story. We've been telling our story, right? We've been telling our story. Now, I don't know how much practical stuff I'm going to give you today, but I want to just offer you a what should we do in the context of Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. The Apostle Paul offers us an identity to live in, a place to start our narration, okay? The way we're going to tell our story, or tell God's story. So here's how it works. He says, he's speaking of himself, I have been crucified with Christ. So what he's saying is, when I would say it is, my turquoise t-shirt or shirt has been crucified with Christ. My Volvo has been crucified with Christ. Everything that I believe that makes me me has been crucified to Christ. Meaning I've let go. I am not holding on with both fists. It's his. It's other people's. It's not mine, right? And the reason that is because, and I no longer live. That's an important thing because where I get life from is my t-shirt. I get life from wearing the shirt and having you say, "Oh, it looks really good on you." Right? Ooh, that feels good. I get some life, right? I'm going to wear it. You take it from me, I'm going to get mad. Okay? So when we're saying, I have been crucified with Christ and I no longer live, I'm not just saying, ooh, this is a cool statement. It's saying the very essence of who I am, I'm dying to. I was listening to a pastor speak and he said, you know what? Spirituality, Christianity light is you sacrificing your life. Like the invitation is Jesus died for you, now take up your cross and die. In order that you might find life. Right? I thought that was really fascinating. That even the light part of our faith is a hard thing to wrestle with. It says, but Christ lives in me. So now my identity and everything that I'm going to talk about is about Christ. And I still can love my shirt, but it's Jesus' shirt, and he gave it to me, and he made turquoise look good on me. And that's how I'll tell that story. The life I now live in the body, I live by the faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Okay, I want to first talk about faith, and then we'll talk about love. Because here's the important part. So we go back to this. Yes. We go back to, is truth dead? And is God dead? Because here's the thing. Faith is the experience of God's kiss. Okay? That there are moment after moment after moment in my life where God has kissed me. Right? I know you're a guy kissing. Yeah, okay. No, there's an intimacy that's happened with me. Maybe it's, maybe I can't put my finger on it in a deep way all the time, but God has moved and acted in my life. And that is not 2 + 2 = 4. It's something I know deep down in the core of who I am, and it is a guidepost to what is true. Right? It's the guidepost to what is true. So I live by faith. It means I live by the knowledge of God's intimate interaction with me. But, whoops. Oh, great. There we go. But here's the thing. I have this knowledge of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The most beautiful, intimate moment that happens in a Christian's life is an understanding that Jesus died for them. For their sin, for their brokenness, for their spiraling out of control, for their prostituting themselves to other gods, to their quickly turning, all those things. For us as followers of Jesus, the most beautiful gift is to know that Jesus died for me and loves me. And if I can start there, I understand that it's been impressed on my heart. And so instead of seeing this statement in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6, where we're supposed to impress them with our children and we're supposed to talk about God everywhere, like instead of seeing this as a burden and a way of getting it right, it's no, Jesus he loves me, and here is how he does it. That he's helped me let go of everything. He's helped me let go of my home. He's helped me let go of my wife, my kids, my car, my t-shirt, right? He's helped me let go. So, oh wow, 6:30. I'm just having a lot of fun. Sorry, guys. Let's quickly go back to everyone did what they wanted to, when they wanted to, with whomever they wanted to, as long as it did not hurt anyone. I want you to listen to that because I actually think it is the thing that you have bought into. You might say, no, Eric, it's not. It is. I'm telling you, I've bought into it. Right? But the beauty is the Judges says, you don't want to go this way because look what's happened. And at the end of Judges, what we have, not in the actual book, but we have the cross saying, it doesn't matter if you walk down that road. It doesn't matter if you did those things, because you have an opportunity to embrace Jesus, to embrace the cross, and to walk a different direction, and to live in freedom, and to know what's true, so that when our culture is trying to find footing, we can say, no, here's the footing. Here's what's true. Here's Jesus. Look at how he showed me where to step. You could come step with me. Right? We have that opportunity. I normally would open this up for question, but I don't even know how I went this long. The morning service was definitely not this long. I must have been really excited today. All right, so let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this community and for your love for us. And I just ask that you would bless the rest of our service. Amen.